Pain came first. A deep, burning pressure across my chest, like something was trying to hold my ribs together from the inside. Then came the sound. A low humming, steady and mechanical, mixed with voices that did not belong to any language I had ever heard. My eyes were still closed, but I could feel the light pressing against my eyelids, sharp and blue, nothing like the warm yellow lights of any hospital I knew. I forced my eyes open. The ceiling above me was curved, made of some smooth, dark material that pulsed faintly, like it was breathing. Thin cables ran along the walls, glowing at the tips. The air smelled clean, almost too clean, like it had been filtered 100 times before it reached my lungs. My body would not move the way I wanted it to. My arms felt heavy, strapped down by something soft but firm. I turned my head, slowly, and that was when I saw them. 3 figures stood near a console a few feet away. They were tall, taller than any person I had ever met, with long limbs that bent in places human limbs did not bend. Their skin had a grayish-blue tone, smooth and slightly shining under the light. Their eyes were large, dark, and set wide apart on narrow faces. They wore long coats, medical in style but cut strangely, built for bodies shaped nothing like mine. For a moment, none of us moved. I stared at them. They stared at me. Then the closest one, the shortest of the 3, made a sound. Not a word, not exactly. A sharp click followed by a low tone, like a question asked in a voice built for a throat I did not have. The other 2 turned toward me at the same instant, and I watched their large eyes widen even further. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, and all that came out was a rough whisper. "Where am I?" They did not answer. Instead, something strange happened. The tallest of the 3 took a step back, away from me, not toward me, the way I imagined a doctor should move toward a patient who had just woken up. The one closest to my bed reached for an instrument on the table beside me, but her hand was shaking. I could see it clearly, even through the thin gloves she wore. A soft chime rang from somewhere in the room, and a small device near my head lit up with shifting lines of light. A moment later, a voice came from it, flat and mechanical, translating words that were being spoken somewhere else in the building. "The vitals are wrong," the device said, repeating what one of them had spoken. "The readings from before are still active. This should not be possible." I tried to sit up, and pain flared across my side, sharp enough that I gasped. The doctor closest to me flinched at the sound, stepping back another half pace, bumping into the console behind her. Whatever fear was passing through that room, I could feel it pressing against my skin like static in the air before a storm. "Please," I said, my voice cracking, "can someone tell me what happened?" The translator caught my words and repeated them in their language, a string of clicks and low tones. The reaction was immediate. All 3 of them went still, not the stillness of people thinking, the stillness of people afraid to move. Then, slowly, the tallest one lowered herself. Not sitting, not kneeling exactly, but folding her long legs beneath her in a way that looked deliberate, practiced, almost ceremonial. The other 2 followed a heartbeat later. All 3 of them lowered their heads, and a quiet sound began to rise from their throats, a rhythmic hum, rising and falling in a pattern that repeated over and over. It took me a moment to understand what I was hearing. They were praying. I had heard prayer before, in different forms, different languages, different rhythms, back on Earth. This did not sound the same, but the shape of it was unmistakable. The reverence in the tone, the way their eyes were closed, the way their hands were pressed together in front of their chests. I had seen enough of it in my life to recognize it anywhere, even coming from a throat that was not human. My mind raced, trying to fit the pieces together. I remembered a transport ship. I remembered warning lights flashing across a control panel, an alarm that would not stop screaming, and then a violent shudder that threw me off my feet. After that, there was nothing. A gap in my memory, dark and empty, like a page torn out of a book. I looked down at myself for the first time since waking up. My chest was wrapped tightly in a silver material that shimmered faintly. Thin tubes ran from my arm to a machine beside the bed, and another line disappeared beneath the wrapping around my ribs. I could feel bandages along my leg as well, though I could not see them under the thin sheet covering me. Whatever had happened to me, it had been bad. Bad enough that these 3 doctors, whoever they were, whatever species they belonged to, had not expected me to open my eyes again. The hum of their prayer slowly faded, and the tallest one lifted her head, opening her eyes to look at me. There was something in her expression that I could not quite place. Not anger, not curiosity, not exactly. Something closer to disbelief, mixed with something that looked almost like fear. She rose to her feet, smooth and controlled despite whatever she was feeling, and stepped closer to the edge of my bed. Her large eyes studied my face carefully, moving from my eyes to the bandages across my chest and back again. She spoke, and the translator near my head caught the words a second later. "You are awake," the device said, flat and emotionless despite the weight behind the words. "You should not be awake." "I don't understand," I said. "What happened to me? Where am I?" The doctor did not answer right away. Instead, she turned toward the console beside my bed and tapped something on its glowing surface. A holographic display appeared in the air above it, filled with strange symbols and shifting graphs that meant nothing to me. She stared at it for a long moment, her long fingers hovering just above the light. "Your body," she said slowly, through the translator, "should have stopped functioning 3 days ago." The words settled over me like cold water. 3 days ago. I tried to remember anything from that time, anything at all, but there was nothing there. Just the gap, just the dark space where memory should have been. "I don't remember," I admitted. "The last thing I remember is the ship, the alarms, then nothing." The second doctor, the one who had flinched earlier, stepped forward now, standing beside the first. She was younger, I guessed, though it was hard to tell with a species I knew nothing about. Her voice, when it came through the translator, was quieter, more hesitant. "We found you in the wreckage of a small vessel," she said. "Your injuries were severe. We did not expect to bring you here alive. We prepared this room for a different purpose." Something about the way she said those last words made my skin prickle, though I could not have explained why. I glanced around the room again, at the tools laid out on a nearby tray, at the strange machines lining the walls, and a small, uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. "What purpose?" I asked. Neither of them answered right away. The tallest doctor exchanged a glance with the other 2, a silent conversation passing between them that I could not follow. Finally, she turned back to me, her large eyes steady, despite whatever uncertainty lay behind them. "That does not matter now," she said. "What matters is that you are alive, and by every measure we have, you should not be." I opened my mouth to ask another question, but a wave of exhaustion rolled over me, heavy and sudden, pulling at the edges of my thoughts. My eyelids felt impossibly heavy. I fought against it for a moment, trying to stay awake, trying to understand what was happening in this strange room with these strange doctors who had knelt beside my bed and prayed the moment I opened my eyes. The last thing I saw before sleep pulled me under again was the tallest doctor stepping back from my bed, her hand pressed briefly against her own chest, her head bowed just slightly, as though she were still finishing something she had started. Whatever I had woken up into, it was not an ordinary hospital, and I was not an ordinary patient. Something about my survival had shaken these people to their core, and I had no idea why. All I knew, as darkness pulled me back under, was that when I woke again, I would need answers. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a small, quiet thought settled in and refused to leave. Wherever I was, whatever species had built this place, they had not expected a human to live, and that fact alone told me my journey through this alien hospital was only just beginning. When I opened my eyes again, the light in the room had changed, dimmer now, softer, like the building itself understood the difference between day and night, even out among the stars. The machines beside my bed still hummed quietly, but the room was empty. No doctors, no prayer, just the steady beep of whatever device was tracking my heartbeat, and the low whir of air moving through unseen vents. I lay there for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together everything that had happened. My memory of the accident was still a blank page, but the fear in that doctor's eyes was burned clearly into my mind. Whatever was going on, it was bigger than a simple rescue. I was about to try sitting up again, testing the strength in my arms, when the door on the far side of the room slid open with a soft hiss. The tallest doctor stepped inside, alone this time, carrying a small device in her hands. She paused when she saw I was awake, her large eyes locking onto mine, and for a moment neither of us said anything. Then she walked closer, slower this time, more careful, and pulled a chair from beside the wall to sit near my bed. It was the first time since I had woken up that one of them had chosen to sit close to me instead of standing back. "My name," she said, the translator picking up her words a beat behind her voice, "is Dr. Ilya Vantris. I am the one who has been overseeing your care since you arrived." "Ethan," I said. My throat still felt raw, but the words came easier now. "Ethan Cole." She repeated my name quietly, as though testing the shape of it, then nodded once. "Ethan Cole," she said. "I need to explain some things to you, and I need you to listen carefully, because I do not fully understand them myself." I nodded, ignoring the dull ache that ran through my shoulder at the motion, and waited. "When we found you," she began, "your injuries were catastrophic. Massive blood loss, internal trauma severe enough that, by every standard of medicine my people have ever developed, you should not have survived the first hour, let alone 3 days. We did not bring you here expecting to save your life." "Then why did you?" I asked. "Why keep me here at all?" Dr. Vantris hesitated, her fingers tightening slightly around the device in her lap. "Because your body would not stop trying to survive," she said. "Even without our intervention, in the early hours, your vitals refused to fall in the pattern we expected. It was unsettling to witness." Something about the careful way she chose her words told me there was more she was not saying, but I decided not to push, not yet. Instead, I asked the question that had been sitting heavy in my chest since I first woke up. "Why were you praying?" I asked. "When I first opened my eyes, all 3 of you knelt down and started praying. Why?" For the first time since she had entered the room, Dr. Vantris looked away from me, her gaze drifting toward the window on the far wall, where the dim light of some distant star filtered through the glass. "That," she said quietly, "is a longer story, one I am not certain I am the right person to tell." I studied her face, searching for any hint of what she was hiding, but her expression remained calm and unreadable, the same careful mask I imagined doctors on Earth wore when delivering difficult news. Still, there was something underneath it, something she was choosing not to show me. "I have time," I said. "It doesn't seem like I'm going anywhere soon." A faint, almost amused expression crossed her face, gone as quickly as it appeared. She set the device in her hands down on the small table beside my bed and folded her long fingers together in her lap. "There are stories," she said slowly, "passed among my people, about your kind, humans, stories that most of us believed were exaggerated or built from misunderstanding, the way old stories often are. I did not expect, in my lifetime, to have one of those stories lying in a bed in front of me." "What kind of stories?" I asked, my curiosity now outweighing the ache in my body. She was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. "Stories of a species that does not know when to stop," she said finally. "A species whose bodies endure what should end them. We have encountered very few humans directly, fewer still have ended up in our care, but the accounts that exist all share the same thread: injuries that should be fatal, recoveries that defy explanation. It has become something of a legend among those who study other species, a frightening one." I let that sit for a moment, unsure how to respond. On Earth, I had always been an ordinary person, an engineer on a transport crew, nothing more. The idea that my species had somehow become the subject of legend among the stars felt too large to fully grasp while lying in a hospital bed with tubes in my arm. "I'm not anything special," I said finally. "Where I come from, I'm just a person doing a job." Dr. Vantris studied me for a long moment, her large eyes searching my face, as though trying to see past the words to something underneath. "Perhaps," she said, "but your body did not know that when it refused to let you die." The silence that followed felt heavier than before, filled with questions neither of us seemed ready to answer. Outside the window, the light of the distant star shifted slightly, and somewhere deeper in the building, I could hear the faint hum of machinery working through the night. Whatever this place was, whatever species had built it, I was beginning to understand that my survival had shaken something far larger than a single hospital room. And I was only beginning to understand why. 2 more days passed before I was strong enough to stay awake for longer stretches, and in that time, Dr. Vantris became the only steady presence in my recovery. The other 2 doctors, a younger woman named Petra Solis and a quiet man named Adrian Fell, came and went in shifts, checking readings, adjusting the machines around me, but they still kept their distance, still watched me with the same careful caution I had noticed on the very first day. It was Petra who finally told me the truth I had been circling since I woke up. She came in alone one evening, carrying a small tray of instruments, and set it down on the table beside my bed without meeting my eyes. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she checked the readings on the machine tracking my heartbeat, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing toward the door as though expecting someone to walk in and stop her from speaking. "Can I ask you something?" I said, breaking the silence. She paused, her fingers still resting on the edge of the console. "You may ask," she said carefully. "I cannot promise an answer." "Dr. Vantris said you prepared this room for a different purpose," I said. What did she mean? Petra's hands went still. For a long moment she said nothing, and I thought she might leave the room without answering, the way Dr. Vantris had done on the first night. But then she let out a slow breath, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet, almost apologetic. "When we recovered you from the wreckage," she said, "our scans showed injuries beyond anything survivable. Massive internal trauma, blood loss far past the threshold any of our species could endure. Our protocols, in cases like that, are not built around treatment. They are built around preservation." "Preservation," I repeated slowly, a cold weight settling in my stomach as I began to understand what she meant. "Your species is rare in this part of the galaxy," she continued. "Encounters are few. When a specimen is recovered in a state we believe to be beyond saving, our research division requests that certain systems be preserved for study. Tissue samples, organ structures. It is considered a valuable contribution to understanding a species we know so little about." The room felt colder suddenly, though nothing about the temperature had changed. I stared at her, my mind struggling to fully absorb what she was telling me. They had brought me here not to save my life, but to study what remained of it after I was gone. "You were preparing to take me apart," I said quietly. Petra flinched at the bluntness of the words, but she did not deny them. "We were preparing to honor what value could still be gained from your loss," she said. "It is not spoken of as cruelty among my people. It is spoken of as respect for what your body could teach us. But yes, that was the intention when you were brought into this room." I did not know what to say. Somewhere beneath the shock, I understood that she was telling the truth as gently as she could, that whatever their customs were, they were not born from malice. But it did little to soften the knowledge that I had come within moments of never waking up, and that if I had not, whatever remained of me would have been carefully separated and studied in the name of science. "But I woke up," I said finally. "You woke up," Petra echoed, and for the first time since she had entered the room, she looked directly at me, her large dark eyes filled with something I could only describe as wonder, mixed with unease. "You woke up, and every instrument in this room told us it was not possible. Dr. Vantris has not slept properly since that moment. None of us have. "Is that why you were praying?" I asked. Petra was quiet for a long moment before she answered. "Among my people," she said slowly, "there are old teachings about certain kinds of survival. Survival that should not happen. It is considered a sign, though the meaning of that sign depends greatly on who is telling the story. Some believe it marks a blessing, others believe it marks a warning." "And which do you believe?" I asked. She did not answer right away. Instead, she picked up the tray of instruments she had brought in and moved toward the door, pausing just before she reached it, her back still turned toward me. "I do not know yet," she said quietly. "None of us do. But you should know, Ethan Cole, that the word spreading through this facility is not simply that a human survived. It is that the undying woke up in our care, and we do not yet know what that means for any of us." The door slid shut behind her before I could ask what she meant by that name, and I was left alone once again, with the steady hum of machines and the weight of everything I had just learned pressing down on my chest like something physical. The undying. I turned the words over in my mind, trying to make sense of them, trying to understand how a title like that could attach itself to someone as ordinary as me. I had never done anything remarkable in my life. I had never fought in a war, never faced down an enemy, never done anything that should have earned me a place in anyone's legends. I was a transport engineer who had been in the wrong place when something went wrong with the ship I was working on. And yet here I was, lying in an alien hospital bed, carrying a name that made grown doctors kneel and pray the moment I opened my eyes. Sleep did not come easily that night. I lay awake for hours, staring at the dim ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the building around me, turning the pieces of everything I had learned over and over in my mind, searching for a shape that made sense. Somewhere out there, beyond the walls of this room, an entire species had built stories around people like me, stories large enough to inspire both reverence and fear. I did not yet understand why, but I understood, with a growing certainty that settled deep in my chest, that I was not going to leave this hospital without finding out. Morning came slowly, marked only by a subtle shift in the light filtering through the window, since I had no way of knowing what a full-day cycle looked like on whatever world or station I was currently on. Dr. Vantris arrived not long after, alone again, carrying a small datapad that she set on the table beside my bed without immediately speaking. "You spoke with Petra," she said finally, not quite a question. "She told me why you were praying," I said. "She told me what this room was meant for." Dr. Vantris nodded slowly, lowering herself into the chair beside my bed the way she had on the first night. Her expression was calm, but I had learned enough about her by now to recognize the careful control behind it, the effort it took to keep her voice steady. "I am not proud of how close we came to that outcome," she said, "but I want you to understand something, Ethan. What happened here was never born from cruelty. It was born from believing, with absolute certainty, that nothing could be done to save you. When a life cannot be saved, we search for meaning in what remains. That is simply how my people have always approached loss." "I understand," I said, and I meant it, even if the knowledge still sat uneasily in my chest. "But I'm still here, so what happens now?" Dr. Vantris was quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting toward the window before returning to meet mine. "Now," she said, "we try to understand how a species we believed we knew something about turned out to be far more than we imagined, and we try to decide, as a facility, as a people, what your survival means for the way we see your kind going forward." I sat with that thought for a long moment, the weight of it settling somewhere deep in my chest. Whatever had happened to bring me here, whatever strange twist of circumstance had placed me in this bed instead of a research tray, I was beginning to understand that my recovery was no longer a private matter. It had become something far larger, something tangled up in history and belief and fear that stretched back long before I had ever set foot on that transport ship. Dr. Vantris rose from her chair, smoothing the front of her coat with careful, practiced movements. "Rest while you can," she said. "There are others who will want to speak with you soon, some out of curiosity, some out of concern. I would ask that you be patient with all of them, even if their questions feel strange to you. I'll try, I said. She paused at the door, glancing back at me one last time before it slid open. For what it is worth, she said quietly, I am glad you woke up, Ethan Cole. Whatever meaning the others choose to find in it, I find comfort in simply knowing you are still here. The door closed behind her, and I was left alone once more with my thoughts, the quiet hum of the machines, and the growing understanding that I had woken up not just in an alien hospital, but in the middle of a story far older and far stranger than I could have ever imagined. The visitor Dr. Vantris had warned me about arrived 2 days later, and he was nothing like the careful, soft-spoken doctors I had grown used to. He entered the room with quick, deliberate steps, followed closely by Adrian Fell, who lingered near the doorway with the same quiet caution I had noticed in him before. The newcomer wore a different uniform than the others, dark gray instead of the pale coats of the medical staff, with markings along the collar that I did not recognize. "You are the human," he said, his voice sharp even through the flat tone of the translator. It was not a question. "Ethan," I said, "Ethan Cole." He studied me for a long moment, his large eyes narrowing slightly, before he pulled a chair from the wall and sat down without being invited. "My name is Commander Talus Roan," he said. "I oversee security for this facility. I have questions, and I would appreciate direct answers." I glanced toward Adrian, who gave the smallest shake of his head, a silent signal that told me to be careful, though careful of what exactly I did not yet know. I turned back to Commander Roan and nodded. "I'll answer what I can," I said. "Good," he said. "Tell me about the incident that brought you here. What happened to your vessel?" I told him what little I remembered, the alarms, the sudden violent shudder that threw me from my feet, the darkness that followed. It was not much, but he listened closely, his expression unreadable, occasionally glancing toward a small device in his hand that I assumed was recording everything I said. "And before the incident," he continued, "were you aware of any conflict in this sector, any hostile presence near your vessel's flight path?" "No," I said honestly. "We were a transport crew, cargo and supplies, nothing military." Commander Roan was quiet for a moment, studying me with an intensity that made the back of my neck prickle. "You understand," he said finally, "that your survival has raised concerns beyond simple curiosity." "I've gathered that," I said, "but I still don't understand why. I'm not anything special where I come from." Something shifted in his expression, something that almost looked like disbelief. He leaned back slightly in his chair, his long fingers tapping once against the device in his hand. "Where you come from," he said slowly, "may not understand what your kind has become out here among the stars. But we do, or at least, we remember." "Remember what?" I asked. He exchanged a brief glance with Adrian before answering, as though weighing how much he was willing to share. 30 years ago," he said finally, "a border dispute broke out between my people and a neighboring alliance over a series of mining stations along a contested trade route. It should have been a small conflict, resolved through negotiation, as most disputes of that kind are. Instead, it escalated, and one of the alliance's contracted defense vessels was crewed, in part, by humans." I said nothing, waiting for him to continue, a strange unease building in my chest. "The details of the engagement are still debated," Commander Roan continued. "But what is known is this. A single vessel, damaged early in the conflict, continued operating for 11 days beyond what our engineers calculated should have been possible. The crew aboard, including the humans among them, sustained injuries during the fighting that should have ended their ability to continue. They did not stop. They held the line until reinforcements arrived, and by the time the conflict ended, my people had lost more ships and more lives than in any engagement in the previous decade." The room felt very still as he spoke, the quiet hum of the machines the only sound beneath his words. "After that conflict," he continued, "reports began circulating, not just among my people, but across several allied species, about encounters with humans in dangerous circumstances. reports of injuries that did not stop them, reports of endurance that defied explanation. Some called it exaggeration. Others called it something closer to fear. Over time, the stories became something larger than simple military reports. They became legend. "And that's why the doctors prayed," I said quietly, beginning to understand. "That is part of it," Commander Roan said. "There are those among my people who believe your survival here is no accident, that it confirms everything the old stories claimed. Others believe it is simple chance, an unusual biology misunderstood through years of retelling. I am not here to decide which belief is correct. I am here to determine whether your presence poses any risk to this facility." The bluntness of the statement struck me harder than I expected. "I'm not a threat," I said. "I'm an engineer. I fix things. I've never fought anyone in my life." "Perhaps," Commander Roan said. "But intention and capability are not the same thing, Ethan Cole. My duty is not to judge your character. It is to understand what you are capable of, should circumstances ever require it." I did not know how to respond to that, so I said nothing, and for a long moment the room sat in uncomfortable silence. Finally, Commander Roan rose from his chair, tucking the small recording device into his coat. "I will be reviewing the full record of your recovery," he said. "In the meantime, I would advise caution in how you present yourself to the staff here. Fear, once it takes root, is not easily removed, even when the danger it fears may not exist." He left without another word, and Adrian lingered near the doorway for a moment longer, his expression softer than the commander's had been. "He means well," Adrian said quietly, once the door had closed behind Roan. "He lost family in that conflict. It shapes how he sees your kind, even now." "I didn't know," I said. "Most humans wouldn't," Adrian said. "The stories that reach your side of the galaxy are rarely the same ones that reach ours." He paused, glancing toward the door as though making sure it was fully closed before continuing. "For what it is worth, I do not believe you are dangerous, Ethan. I have spent enough hours watching your readings to know that your body does not fight the way a soldier's does. It simply refuses to stop, even when it should. There is a difference, though I am not certain everyone here sees it yet." His words settled over me like a small, strange comfort, though the unease from Commander Roan's visit lingered long after Adrian left the room. I lay back against the bed, staring up at the curved ceiling, turning over everything I had just learned. 30 years of stories, built from a single desperate conflict, had shaped an entire narrative around my species, one filled with fear and reverence in equal measure. I had grown up on Earth with no knowledge of any of it, no understanding that somewhere out among the stars, my kind had become something between legend and warning. And now, through nothing more than surviving an accident I could not even fully remember, I had become the latest chapter in that story. Over the following days, I noticed the shift in how the wider staff treated me. Where before there had been cautious distance, now there were curious glances through the small window in my door, quiet conversations that stopped abruptly when I looked toward them, and once, a young technician who nearly dropped an entire tray of instruments simply because I had smiled at her in greeting. It was exhausting, in a way I had not expected. Every small interaction carried weight, every gesture scrutinized for meaning I had not intended. I began to understand, slowly, why Dr. Vantris had looked so tired every time she entered my room. She was not just managing my recovery. She was managing the fear and fascination of an entire facility, all centered around the fact that I had simply woken up. It was during one of these long, quiet afternoons that Petra returned to check on my readings, and I decided to ask her the question that had been building in my mind since Commander Roan's visit. "Do you believe the stories?" I asked. "About humans being unstoppable, I mean." Petra paused in her work, considering the question carefully before answering. "I believe your body did something my science cannot yet explain," she said. "Whether that makes the old stories true or simply misunderstood, I do not know. But I have started to wonder if perhaps the truth is smaller than the legend and larger than we first believed, both at once." "What do you mean?" I asked. "The stories speak of humans who cannot be stopped," she said, "as though your kind fights without pain, without fear, without limit. But watching you these past days, I do not see someone without limit. I see someone in pain, frightened in moments though you try to hide it, uncertain of what is happening around you. What I see is not a legend. I see someone who survived something that should have ended him, and who is still, somehow, simply a person." Her words settled into my chest with a warmth I had not expected to feel in that cold, humming room. It was the first time since I had woken up that someone had looked past the fear and the legend and simply seen me for what I actually was. "Thank you," I said quietly. Petra offered a small, careful smile, the first genuine one I had seen from any of them since I had arrived. "I think," she said, "that perhaps understanding your kind requires looking past the stories entirely. Perhaps it requires simply watching and listening and allowing the truth to be smaller and more human than the legend ever allowed for." As she left the room that evening, I found myself thinking about her words, long after the lights had dimmed for the night cycle. Whatever fear had gripped this facility since the moment I opened my eyes, whatever ancient stories had shaped how these people saw my kind, I understood now that changing that perception would not come from grand gestures or declarations. It would come from small moments, quiet honesty, the simple, patient work of being seen clearly, one conversation at a time. I did not yet know how long my recovery would take, or what waited for me once I was finally strong enough to leave this room. But for the first time since waking up in this strange, humming hospital, I felt something other than fear pressing against my chest. I felt the faint, fragile beginning of understanding, both theirs and my own, and I decided, quietly, that I would do everything I could to nurture it before I left this place behind. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm, and with each one, I felt a little more of my strength returning. The tubes connecting me to the machines beside my bed were removed one by one, and Dr. Vantris began allowing me short walks along the corridor outside my room, always accompanied, always watched, but walks nonetheless. It felt like a small victory each time my feet carried me a little farther than the day before. It was during one of these walks that I met the young technician who had nearly dropped her tray of instruments in front of me days earlier. Her name, I learned, was Nadia Voss, and she could not have been more than a few years into her training, judging by the nervous energy that seemed to follow her through every task. She kept a careful distance the first time we passed each other in the corridor, her eyes lowered, her steps quick. "You don't have to be afraid of me," I said gently, pausing beside her workstation. She looked up, startled, as though she had not expected me to address her directly. "I am not afraid," she said quickly, though the tremor in her voice suggested otherwise. I smiled, keeping my tone light. "It's all right if you are," I said. I was pretty afraid myself, waking up in a place I didn't recognize, surrounded by people I'd never met. Seems fair that it might go both ways. Something in her posture relaxed slightly at that, a small crack in the careful composure she had been holding on to. "The stories say your kind does not feel fear," she said, "that you simply endure." "The stories are wrong about a lot of things, I think," I said. I was terrified. I still get nervous walking down this hallway, if I'm honest. Mostly because I keep worrying I'll trip and prove every doctor here right about how fragile I actually am underneath all this. A small, surprised laugh escaped her before she could stop it, quickly covered by her hand, as though laughing in my presence was somehow against the rules. But the sound of it, genuine and unguarded, felt like the first real breakthrough since I had woken up in this place. "You are not what I expected," she admitted quietly. "Good," I said. "I'd rather be a surprise than a legend." Legends don't get to make bad jokes in hospital corridors. Over the following days, small moments like that one began to accumulate, each one chipping away at the wall of fear and reverence that had surrounded me since my first breath in that room. I made a point of learning names, not just of the doctors overseeing my care, but of the technicians who checked the machines each morning, the quiet staff member who brought meals to my room, even the maintenance worker who repaired a faulty panel near my window one afternoon while I watched from my bed. I asked about their lives when they seemed willing to share. Nadia, it turned out, had a younger sibling back on her home world who wanted desperately to follow her into medical training, though their family worried the work was too demanding for someone so young. Adrian, quiet as he was during our early conversations, opened up slowly about a partner waiting for him on a research station several systems away, and the long stretches of separation that came with a career like his. Even Petra, careful and measured in everything she said, mentioned once, almost in passing, a garden she kept at her family's home, one she missed tending during the long shifts required by her work here. These were not the details of legends. They were the details of ordinary lives, filled with ordinary worries and ordinary joys, and I found myself grateful for every small piece they were willing to share. In turn, I told them about my own life, about the transport crew I had worked with for years before the accident, about the small apartment I kept back on Earth, about a sister who worried every time I left on a long-haul job, though she would never admit it outright. Slowly, I watched the atmosphere in the facility begin to shift. The curious glances through my door's small window became less frequent, replaced instead by short, friendly greetings when staff passed in the corridor. The careful distance others had kept during my early days softened into something closer to comfortable familiarity, though traces of caution remained, deep habits built over 30 years of stories that would not disappear overnight. Commander Roan, I noticed, kept his distance during this period, though I occasionally caught sight of him observing from a distance during my walks, his expression unreadable as always. Dr. Vantris mentioned once, quietly, that he continued reviewing every record of my recovery, still searching for something that would confirm the fears his people had carried since the conflict 30 years prior. "He will come around in time," she said one evening, as she checked the readings on the console beside my bed. "Or he will not. Some fears run deeper than evidence can reach, no matter how gently that evidence is presented." "I understand," I said. "I can't ask everyone to trust me just because I've been polite for a couple of weeks. That's not how real trust works, is it?" Dr. Vantris paused, studying me with an expression I had come to recognize as something close to fondness, though still layered beneath her careful professional composure. "No," she agreed. "It is not. But I think you already understand that better than most who have carried the weight of the stories surrounding your kind." It was around this time that I began to notice something curious happening among the medical staff, something Petra eventually explained to me during one of our longer conversations. The ritual of prayer that had greeted my first waking moments in this hospital had not disappeared, as I had assumed it might once the initial shock wore off. Instead, it had begun to change shape. Some of the staff still gather quietly, Petra told me, though not out of fear any longer. Or at least, not entirely. It has become something closer to gratitude, I think, a way of acknowledging that something rare and unexplainable happened in this building, and that we were fortunate enough to witness it. "Gratitude?" I repeated, turning the word over carefully. "That's a big shift from what I remember on that first day." "Fear and gratitude are not always so different," Petra said thoughtfully. "Both come from recognizing something larger than ourselves. It simply depends on what we choose to do with that recognition." I thought about her words often in the days that followed, especially during the quiet hours of the night cycle, when sleep did not come easily, and my mind wandered back over everything that had happened since I first opened my eyes in this strange humming room. I had arrived here as an accident, a body nearly lost to the void, prepared for nothing more than study and preservation. And somewhere in the space between that first terrified prayer and the quiet gratitude Petra now described, something had changed, not just in how they saw me, but in how I understood myself. I was not a legend. I had never wanted to be one, but perhaps, I began to realize, legends were never really about the person at their center. They were about the fears and hopes of the people who told them, shaped and reshaped across years and distance, until the truth at their core became almost unrecognizable. My task, it seemed, was not to prove the legend true or false, but simply to exist honestly enough that the people around me could see past it entirely. One afternoon, as my strength continued to return and Dr. Vantris cleared me for longer stretches of walking, I found myself standing beside the large window at the end of the corridor, looking out over a landscape I had not yet had the chance to properly see. The hospital, it turned out, sat on the edge of a wide research station overlooking a rocky, amber-colored terrain, dotted with distant structures and the faint shimmer of an atmospheric shield stretching overhead. Nadia found me there, pausing beside me with a small tray of supplies balanced carefully in her hands. "It is beautiful, is it not?" she said. "Even after so many years here, I do not tire of the view." "It is," I agreed, and for a moment, we simply stood together in comfortable silence, watching the amber light shift across the distant terrain. "May I ask you something?" she said finally, her voice quieter than usual. "Of course," I said. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Of what happens next? Of returning to your own people after everything that has happened here?" I considered the question carefully before answering. "A little," I admitted. "I don't know what waits for me once I leave this room. I don't know how my crew will react, or what happens to the reputation you all have built up around people like me once I'm gone. But I think I've learned something important during my time here." "What is that?" she asked. "That fear and understanding aren't opposites," I said, echoing, without fully realizing it, the same wisdom Petra had shared with me weeks before. Sometimes you need a little of both to really see someone clearly. I'd rather leave this place understood than simply feared, even if it takes longer to get there. Nadia smiled, a genuine, warm expression that had become far more common in our conversations over the past weeks. "I think," she said, "that you already have, more than you realize." Her words stayed with me long after she continued on her way down the corridor, settling into my chest with a quiet, steady comfort. Whatever legend had followed my species across 30 years and countless retellings, I had spent these past weeks doing the only thing I knew how to do. Being honest, being patient, being simply and completely myself. And slowly, carefully, it seemed to be working. The morning Dr. Vantris told me I was strong enough to leave, I did not feel the relief I had expected to feel. Instead, standing beside my bed for what would likely be one of the last times, I felt something closer to quiet reflection, a recognition that the weeks spent in this humming room had changed something in me I did not yet fully understand. "Your recovery has exceeded every projection we made," Dr. Vantris said, reviewing the data pad in her hands one final time. "By our most optimistic estimates, you should still be confined to this bed for another 2 weeks at minimum. Instead, you stand before me ready to walk out under your own strength." "I guess I had good doctors," I said. A faint smile crossed her face, one of the few I had seen from her during my entire stay. "Perhaps," she said, "or perhaps the old stories carried more truth in them than any of us were prepared to admit, even now." Word of my discharge seemed to spread quickly through the facility, and by the time I made my way toward the transport bay that would carry me back to a waiting shuttle, a small gathering of familiar faces had assembled along the corridor. Petra stood near the front, her hands folded neatly in front of her, a small garden clipping tucked carefully behind one ear, a gift I suspected she had brought from her own quarters. Adrian lingered nearby, offering a quiet nod as I passed, his expression carrying a warmth that had not been there during our first tense conversation weeks earlier. Even Nadia had found a way to step away from her duties, standing near the edge of the group with a bright, genuine smile that reminded me of just how far we had come since the day she nearly dropped an entire tray of instruments simply from being near me. Commander Roan stood a short distance apart from the others, his posture still formal, still measured, though something in his expression had softened since our first meeting. As I approached, he stepped forward, extending a hand in a gesture I recognized from my own culture, though I doubted it came naturally to his. "I have reviewed every record of your recovery," he said, his voice quieter than I remembered from our first conversation. "I still do not fully understand what allowed your body to endure what it endured, but I no longer believe you arrived here as a threat, Ethan Cole. Whatever the old stories claim about your kind, I have watched you these past weeks, and I have seen nothing but patience and honesty in return for the fear this facility greeted you with. Thank you, I said, accepting his offered hand. That means more than you probably realize. He held my gaze a moment longer before releasing my hand and stepping back, allowing Dr. Vantris to move forward and lead me the remaining distance toward the gathered group. As I reached them, something unexpected happened, something I had not anticipated despite everything I had learned over the past weeks about this place and its people. Slowly, one by one, they began to lower themselves. The same careful, deliberate motion I remembered from that first terrified moment when I opened my eyes in this hospital. Dr. Vantris first, followed closely by Petra, then Adrian, and finally, hesitantly, Nadia. Even Commander Roan, after a long moment of visible internal deliberation, lowered his head in the same quiet gesture. The low, rhythmic hum began to rise from their throats, the same prayer I remembered from my first waking moments in this place. But this time, as I stood in the center of that circle, I understood it differently. This was not the fearful prayer of doctors preparing themselves for something they did not understand. This was something gentler, something rooted in gratitude rather than dread. I did not fully understand the words, even with the quiet translation offered through the small device Dr. Vantris had given me to keep, but I understood the feeling behind them, the same feeling I had come to recognize in every quiet conversation and shared laugh over these past weeks. It was the sound of people who had learned, slowly and carefully, to see past the legend and find something real underneath it. When the prayer finished and their heads lifted once more, Dr. Vantris stepped forward, holding out a small carved object I did not immediately recognize. It fit easily into my palm, cool and smooth, etched with delicate patterns that seemed to shift slightly depending on the angle of the light. A token of gratitude, she explained, traditionally given to mark a life that changed the course of another's understanding. I do not know if such traditions exist among your people, but I hope you will accept it in the spirit it is given. I will, I said, closing my fingers gently around the object. Thank you, all of you, for everything. I know this wasn't easy, having someone like me show up the way I did. No, Dr. Vantris agreed. It was not easy, but I believe in the end it was worthwhile, for all of us. The walk to the shuttle bay felt longer than I expected, filled with quiet conversation and small parting words from the staff who had become, over these strange and difficult weeks, something closer to friends than caretakers. Nadia promised to write, curious to learn more about life on a world she had never visited. Petra offered a small cutting from the garden clipping she had brought, insisting I plant it somewhere once I returned home, a strange but touching gesture I promised to honor. Even Adrian, quiet as ever, offered a final piece of advice before I boarded the shuttle waiting to carry me away. Whatever waits for you when you return, he said, I hope you carry this experience with the same patience you showed us here. Not every story needs to be a legend to matter, Ethan. Sometimes the small, honest ones matter more. I thought about his words as the shuttle doors closed behind me, and I settled into the seat prepared for the journey ahead. Through the small window beside me, I watched the hospital grow smaller as the shuttle lifted away from the research station, the amber terrain stretching out beneath the shimmering atmospheric shield, the same view I had admired with Nadia, weeks earlier, now shrinking steadily into the distance. As the shuttle cleared the station's boundary and the stars opened wide across the window, I caught my own reflection staring back at me in the glass. Bruised in places still healing, thinner than I remembered from before the accident, but steady, calm, and unmistakably myself. Not a legend. Not a warning whispered across 30 years of fearful stories. Just a person, ordinary in every way that mattered, who had somehow found himself at the center of something far larger than he ever expected. I thought about Dr. Vantris, standing quietly beside my bed on that first terrified night, praying over a body she believed was already lost. I thought about Petra's careful honesty, Adrian's quiet wisdom, Nadia's nervous laughter slowly transforming into genuine friendship, and even Commander Roan's guarded distance softening into something closer to respect. Every one of them had carried fear into that hospital room the day I arrived. Fear built from decades of stories none of them had chosen, but all of them had inherited. And yet, somehow, through nothing more than patience and honesty, and the simple, quiet work of being seen clearly, that fear had transformed into something gentler, something worth carrying forward. The small carved token Dr. Vantris had given me sat warm in my palm as the shuttle carried me further from the research station, further from the strange and humming hospital where I had woken to the sound of frightened prayer, and further still from the legend that had greeted me the moment I first opened my eyes. Wherever my journey carried me next, whatever crew or destination waited on the other side of this long, quiet flight home, I understood now that the story following behind me had changed shape entirely. No longer a warning, no longer a legend built from fear. Simply the quiet, honest truth of one ordinary life, carried carefully forward by people who had learned, against every expectation, to see it clearly. And as the stars stretched wide before me, and the research station disappeared entirely into the darkness behind, I closed my eyes, and for the first time since waking in that alien hospital bed, I allowed myself to simply rest.